When Caleb Rourke rode into Ridgewood expecting a young bride, the whole town held its breath. What stepped out of that church wasn't what anyone bargained for. Marion Shaw, 50 years old, gray-streaked hair, and eyes that had seen too much, stood there like she was daring the world to spit on her one more time. The whispers started before Caleb even dismounted. He got cheated. She's old enough to be his mother. But what nobody knew was that this wasn't about romance. This was about survival. And sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose. If you want to see how far grit and stubbornness can carry two broken people, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The stagecoach rattled into Ridgewood on a Tuesday afternoon, dust swirling behind it like the devil's own breath. Caleb Rourke stood outside the general store, hat in hand, watching it approach. His stomach felt like someone had filled it with rocks and river water. He'd been waiting 3 months for this. 3 months since he'd sent that letter east, asking for a wife. Not because he wanted one, not really, but because the silence in his cabin had started eating him alive. A man could only talk to himself for so long before the mountains started talking back. The stage driver pulled the horses to a stop, leather creaking. Caleb's hands were sweating despite the autumn chill. "You Rourke?" the driver called down. "That's me. Got a delivery for you." The man's grin was mean around the edges. "Special order from back east." The door opened. Caleb had imagined this moment 100 different ways. In his head, she was always young. Not beautiful necessarily, but young, sturdy. Someone who could bear children and keep a house and not ask too many questions about the woman whose clothes still hung in his closet. What emerged from that coach was nothing like his imaginings. She was tall, taller than most women he'd known, with shoulders that looked like they'd carried their share of weight. Her dress was dark gray, practical, mended at the elbows. But it was her face that stopped him cold. Lines bracketed her mouth. Gray streaked through her brown hair, which she'd pinned back severe and plain. Her eyes were the color of winter smoke, and when they met his, they didn't flinch or flutter or look away. She was old. Not elderly, but old. 50 maybe. Old enough that the math didn't work. Old enough that... Caleb Rourke? Her voice was lower than he'd expected. Steady. He realized he was staring. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Marion Shaw." She stepped down from the coach without waiting for help, her movements careful but not frail. "I believe we have an arrangement." Behind him, Caleb heard the whispers starting. Mrs. Yates from the boarding house, Tom Brennan from the lumber office. Even young Jimmy Colfax, who should have been at school, had materialized to gawk. "She's old," someone muttered. Caleb's face went hot. He'd been expecting judgment, had braced for it, but not this particular flavor of it. Marion heard it too. He saw something flicker across her face, quick as lightning, before it smoothed back to that careful blankness. She'd heard this before, he realized. This wasn't new humiliation. This was just more of the same. "We should get your things," he said louder than necessary. "I don't have much." She gestured to a single trunk the driver was already hauling down. "This is it." One trunk, 30-some-odd years of life, and it fit in one trunk. Caleb paid the driver, loaded the trunk into his wagon, and helped Marion up onto the bench seat. She sat straight-backed, hands folded in her lap, while the town of Ridgewood watched and whispered. He snapped the reins harder than he meant to. They rode in silence for the first mile. The road climbed steadily away from town, winding up through stands of pine and aspen. The wagon wheels clattered over stones. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. "You're disappointed," Marion said finally. Caleb's jaw tightened. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." She was looking straight ahead, not at him. "The advertisement said a woman seeking marriage. It didn't specify an age. I assumed you understood that meant someone like me. Someone past her prime, as they say." "I assumed..." He stopped himself. What had he assumed? That any woman desperate enough to answer a stranger's ad would be young? That only girls made foolish choices? "You assumed I'd be younger," Marion finished. "Most men do." There was no accusation in her voice, just fact, flat and worn smooth by repetition. "Why'd you come?" Caleb asked. The question came out rougher than he'd meant it. "If you knew, if you thought..." "Why did I come to marry a stranger?" Marion's laugh was brief and humorless. Because the alternative was worse. He waited, but she didn't elaborate. Just sat there with her hands folded, watching the trees pass by. The cabin came into view as they rounded the last bend. It sat on a ridge overlooking the valley, built from logs Caleb had cut himself. Solid. Simple. Lonely as hell. He pulled the wagon up to the porch and set the brake. Marion climbed down before he could offer his hand again, surveying the place with an unreadable expression. "It's not much," Caleb said. "It's more than I had yesterday." She walked up the 3 steps to the porch, testing each board before putting her full weight on it. Professional assessment, like she'd learned not to trust surfaces that looked solid. Caleb hauled her trunk inside and set it by the door. The cabin smelled like wood smoke and old coffee. He'd cleaned before leaving, swept the floors, aired out the quilts, but it still felt like what it was, a place where a man had been living alone too long. Marion stood in the center of the room, taking it all in. The rough-hewn table, the fireplace with its blackened stones, the curtains he'd never bothered to replace when they'd started fraying. Her gaze snagged on something above the mantel. Caleb followed her eyes and felt his stomach drop. The photograph. He'd meant to put it away, had told himself he would, a dozen times. But somehow it had stayed there. Sarah in her wedding dress, young and bright-eyed and so damn alive it hurt to look at. "Your first wife?" Marion asked. "Yes." The word came out clipped. "How long ago?" 4 years. Marion nodded slowly, still looking at the photograph. "She was very beautiful." She was. Caleb couldn't read Marion's tone, wasn't sure if he was supposed to apologize or defend or explain. "I'm not here to replace her," Marion said. "I want that understood from the start. I'm not here to compete with a dead woman's memory." The bluntness of it stole his breath for a moment. "I'm here," Marion continued, turning to face him now, "because I need a roof over my head and a name that isn't tied to debts I can't pay. You're here because you need someone to cook and clean and keep this place from falling into ruin around your ears. That's the arrangement. I won't ask for affection I haven't earned, and I expect you won't pretend to feel what you don't." Caleb had imagined this conversation too, in the long nights before she arrived. But in his head, it had been gentler, more tentative, not this hard-edged negotiation. "Fair enough," he managed. "Good." Marion unbuttoned her traveling coat and hung it on a peg by the door. "Then show me where things are, and I'll start earning my keep." He showed her. The root cellar where he kept potatoes and salted meat, the well out back, the woodpile he'd been meaning to cover before the snow came. The bedroom, he stumbled over that one, heat creeping up his neck, explaining he'd sleep in the loft for now, give her privacy until they figured things out. Marion just nodded, practical as anything. By evening, she'd transformed the place. Not dramatically. She hadn't had time for that. But the small things added up. The floors were swept cleaner than they'd been in months. The dishes from his bachelor breakfast were washed and stacked. Something simmered on the stove that actually smelled like food instead of the beans and bacon monotony he'd been subsisting on. They ate in near silence, the scrape of forks on tin plates the only sound. Caleb kept sneaking glances at her across the table. In the lamplight, the lines on her face seemed deeper. She looked tired. Actually, she looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep weariness that sleep couldn't fix. "You got people back east?" he asked finally. "Family?" "No." Marion set down her fork. "Not anymore." "What happened?" She considered the question for a long moment, like she was deciding how much truth to tell. "My husband died 7 years ago. Left me with debts he'd never mentioned and a house I couldn't afford. I worked as a seamstress, a laundress, whatever I could find. Wasn't enough. The man who held our debts..." She stopped, jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "He made an arrangement. Said he'd forgive what I owed if I'd come west as a mail-order bride. Said he knew men who needed wives and didn't care about age." Caleb felt something cold settle in his gut. Who was he? His name was Victor Hale. Hale. Caleb knew that name. Everyone who did business in timber knew that name. Victor Hale owned half the lumber operations in the territory, plus mining interests, plus whatever else he could sink his claws into. He's the one who arranged this? Yes. Did he? Caleb couldn't quite voice the question. No. Marion's voice went flat. Not that. He's too smart for that. But he owned my life just the same. Every dollar I earned went to paying him back, and the number never seemed to get smaller. Coming here was the only way out. And if I'd turned you away, then I'd have been his problem again. She looked at him directly. That's why I didn't lie about my age when I wrote back. I figured if you rejected me, at least it would be honest. At least I'd know I tried. Caleb pushed his plate away, appetite gone. You could have told me, in the letters. Would you have agreed to marry me if you'd known I was 50? He wanted to say yes, wanted to be the kind of man who cared about character over youth, who'd see past the gray hair and the lines around her eyes. But honesty was the only currency either of them seemed to have right now. I don't know, he admitted. That's fair. Marion stood, gathering the plates. Most men wouldn't have. The first week was awkward as hell. They moved around each other like strangers in a house neither of them owned, overly polite and careful not to touch. Marion cooked, Caleb ate, she mended his shirts. He thanked her. They talked about the weather, about whether the firewood would last the winter, about anything except the fact that they were married and sleeping in separate rooms and the whole town was probably taking bets on how long it would last. Caleb went to work each morning before dawn, hauling timber down from the high country with a crew of men who asked too many questions with their eyes. He came home to hot food and a clean house, and a wife who treated him like a boarding tenant she was fond of but not particularly interested in. It was fine, it was practical, it was making him crazy. Not because he wanted her, though he'd be lying if he said he hadn't noticed the quiet competence in the way she moved, the intelligence in those winter smoke eyes, but because he couldn't figure her out. She gave him nothing. No complaints, no demands, no glimpses past that careful exterior. On the 8th day, he came home early. He'd left his best saw at the cabin, the one with the new blade, and rather than waste time, he'd ridden back to fetch it. The afternoon sun was still high when he dismounted. The cabin door was open. He could hear Marion inside, moving around, and singing. It stopped him dead on the porch. Her voice was low and rough around the edges, but it carried something that made his chest ache. An old song, one his own mother used to sing when she thought no one was listening, about a girl and a soldier and a promise that couldn't be kept. Caleb stood there, saw forgotten, and listened. When the song ended, he waited a few seconds before stepping inside, giving her time to hear his boots on the wood. Marion was at the table, a basket of mending in front of her. She looked up without surprise. Forgot something? She asked. My saw. He grabbed it from where it leaned against the wall. Didn't mean to interrupt. You didn't. But her hands had gone still on the shirt she was repairing. Caleb should have left. Should have ridden back up the mountain and put in another 4 hours before dark. Instead, he heard himself say, You got a nice voice. Marion's expression did something complicated. Thank you. You sing often? When I'm alone. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he saw something other than careful neutrality in her face. I'll remember to stop when you're around. I didn't mean... Caleb set the saw down. You don't have to stop. I just meant it was nice, hearing it. They stared at each other for a moment, and Caleb had the distinct sense that they were negotiating something neither of them wanted to name. I'll be more careful, Marion said finally. Don't be. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Mr. Rourke, Caleb. Caleb. She tested the name like it might bite her. We agreed this was a practical arrangement. We did. Then let's keep it that way. I'll do my work. You'll do yours. We don't need to pretend there's more to it. Caleb felt something like anger spark in his chest, though at what, exactly, he couldn't say. I'm not pretending anything. I'm just saying you don't have to walk on eggshells in your own damn house. This isn't my house, Marion said quietly. It's yours. I'm just living in it. We're married. On paper. That's more than paper. He gestured around the cabin. You've been here a week and the place already feels different. Feels like... Like what? Like someone lives here. Not just me. Marion set down her mending carefully, like it was made of glass. I appreciate the thought, but I've been someone's burden before. I won't be yours. You're not a burden. Not yet. She stood, smoothing her skirt with hands that weren't quite steady. But I've seen how this goes. Man marries a woman who isn't what he wanted, resents her, starts spending more time in town, drinking away the disappointment. Eventually he finds someone younger, prettier, more... Sarah died in this cabin. Caleb cut her off, voice harder than he meant it to be. Died right there in that bedroom while I was up the mountain cutting timber. I came home and found her on the floor. She'd been gone for hours." Marion went still. "So no," Caleb continued, the words spilling out like blood from a wound he'd thought was healed. "I don't spend time in town drinking. I don't go looking for younger women. I work until I'm too tired to think, and then I come home and sit in this empty cabin and try to remember what the hell I'm doing any of this for." The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. "I'm sorry," Marion said finally. "I didn't know." "How could you?" Caleb grabbed his saw, needing something to do with his hands. "I didn't tell you. The photograph doesn't tell you anything." He headed for the door, then stopped. "For what it's worth, you're not what I expected. But that doesn't make you a disappointment." He left before she could respond, before he could say anything else he'd regret. That night, Marion made stew. Not the thin, watery kind Caleb had been choking down for years, but the real thing, thick with vegetables and chunks of venison, seasoned with herbs he didn't know he had. The smell of it filled the cabin like a promise. He came in from the cold to find the table set, the lamp lit, and Marion ladling stew into bowls with the same careful precision she brought to everything. "Smells good," he offered. "It's my mother's recipe." She set a bowl in front of him. She used to make it on Sundays. They ate. This time, the silence felt different. Less like strangers and more like two people who'd agreed to a truce they didn't quite understand. Halfway through the meal, Marion spoke. "I had a daughter." Caleb looked up sharply. "She died," Marion continued, eyes fixed on her bowl. 8 years old, scarlet fever. That was before my husband passed, before everything fell apart. "I'm sorry." "So am I." Marion's voice was steady, but her knuckles were white around her spoon. "I tell you this because you told me about your wife. Seemed only fair." Fair. Like they were trading wounds, laying them out on the table between the stew and the bread. "What was her name?" Caleb asked. "Elizabeth." Marion smiled, but it was the saddest thing he'd ever seen. She had red hair, not from me or her father. It just appeared like a gift from some ancestor neither of us knew about. She hated it, called it her carrots. Sarah hated her freckles, Caleb found himself saying. Said they made her look 12 years old. "How did you meet her?" "Church social. She spilled punch on my shirt and was so mortified she couldn't speak. I told her it was an improvement. The shirt was ugly anyway." The memory came easier than he'd expected. She laughed, had this laugh that made everyone around her want to laugh too. Marion was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "You loved her very much." "I did." "And you still do." It wasn't a question, but Caleb answered anyway. "Yes, that's good," Marion said. "That's as it should be." They finished their stew. Caleb helped with the dishes without being asked, standing beside her at the wash basin while the lamplight flickered and the wind picked up outside. Their hands didn't touch, but they worked in a rhythm that felt almost companionable. Later, after Marion had retired to the bedroom and Caleb had climbed to his loft, he lay awake listening to the cabin settle around him. He could hear her moving below, getting ready for bed. The creak of floorboards, the rustle of fabric. He'd meant what he said. She wasn't a disappointment. But she wasn't Sarah either, and he still didn't know what the hell that meant. The second week brought snow. Not the big blizzards that would come later, but the first tentative flakes that warned of what was coming. Caleb worked faster, trying to get the last of the timber down before the roads became impassable. He came home later each night, exhausted and covered in sawdust. Marion never complained. Dinner was always ready. The fire was always going. She'd figured out his routine and adapted to it seamlessly, like she'd been doing this for years instead of days. On Saturday, he offered to take her into town. "We need supplies," he said over breakfast. "Thought you might want to come, see the place properly." Marion's hand stilled on her coffee cup. "I saw it well enough when I arrived." "That was different." "Was it?" "They're going to talk no matter what," Caleb said. "Might as well give them something real to talk about instead of just speculation." "You mean you want to show them I'm not some burden you're hiding away?" "I mean I'm tired of caring what they think." That surprised a laugh out of her. Short and sharp, but genuine. Liar. "All right, I'm not tired of caring, but I'm tired of avoiding town like I did something wrong." Marion considered this, head tilted. "What if I make it worse?" "How?" "I'm not..." She gestured vaguely at herself. I'm not what they expected. You heard them the day I arrived. I heard them. Caleb drained his coffee, set the cup down with more force than necessary. They can think what they want. You're my wife, that's what matters. Something shifted in Marion's expression. On paper. In fact, the words hung between them, heavier than he'd meant them to be. All right, Marion said finally. I'll go. Ridgewood looked different under snow, quieter. The main street was mostly empty, just a few hardy souls moving between buildings. Caleb pulled the wagon up in front of the general store and helped Marion down. She'd worn her good dress, the one that was less mended than the others, and pinned her hair back with more care than usual. She looked nervous, though she hid it well. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. Horace Miller looked up from behind the counter, his expression doing something complicated when he saw Marion. Caleb, Mrs. Rourke. Horace. Caleb nodded. Need some supplies. Sure thing. Horace's eyes kept sliding to Marion. What can I get you? Caleb started listing items, but he was watching the way Marion moved through the store. She didn't touch anything unnecessarily, didn't wander, just stood quiet and still, like she was trying not to take up space. Two women entered while Horace was tallying the order, Mrs. Yates from the boarding house and Clara Brennan, the blacksmith's wife. Their conversation died the moment they saw Marion. Mrs. Rourke, Mrs. Yates said, voice dripping false sweetness. What a surprise to see you in town. Mrs. Yates. Marion's voice was level. Mrs. Brennan. We were just saying the other day, Clara Brennan continued, how unusual it must be for you, coming all this way at your age. Caleb felt his jaw clench, but before he could speak, Marion replied, It's certainly different from Philadelphia. I'm sure it is. Mrs. Yates moved closer, eyes sharp with curiosity. Though I imagine at your age one gets used to adjusting to circumstances. The barb was delicate but clear. Marion smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. One does, though I find the adjustments get easier with practice. I suppose they must. Clara Brennan fingered a bolt of fabric, not quite looking at Marion. Still, it must be difficult, being so much older than your husband. 17 years, Marion said calmly, though I admit I've stopped counting. The number landed like a stone in still water. Caleb hadn't known the exact gap, hadn't done the math. 17 years. She was right. Sarah could have been their daughter. Well, Mrs. Yates said, recovering, I'm sure Caleb appreciates having someone to keep house for him. A man needs looking after. So I've been told. The conversation continued like that, each woman taking delicate verbal jabs while Marion deflected with a calm that seemed to infuriate them more than fighting back would have. Caleb paid for the supplies and loaded them into the wagon, but he couldn't shake the anger simmering in his chest. On the ride home, Marion was quiet. You handled them well, Caleb said finally. I've had practice. Practice being insulted? Practice being the wrong woman in the room. Marion was looking straight ahead, hands folded in her lap in that way she had. I learned young that fighting back just gives people ammunition. Better to let them say their piece and move on. That's bullshit. She glanced at him, surprised. They had no right to talk to you like that, Caleb continued, the words coming hot and fast now. No right to make you feel small or wrong or like you don't belong. But I don't belong, Marion said. Not really. They all know it. I'm the old bride who showed up instead of the young one Caleb Rourke ordered. I'm the mistake that couldn't be sent back. You're not a mistake. Then what am I? Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop. They were halfway up the mountain, the town invisible behind them, the cabin still out of sight ahead. Just the two of them, and the snow-covered trees and the question hanging between them like fog. You're my wife, Caleb said. That's not nothing. It's also not everything. No. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the weariness there, the careful way she held herself like something that had been broken and poorly mended. But it's a start. Marion studied his face for a long moment. Why did you marry me, Caleb? The truth. I told you I needed not the practical reasons, the real one. He could have lied, could have given her the easy answer about loneliness and convenience, but something in her eyes demanded honesty, and he found himself giving it. I was disappearing, he said. living alone in that cabin, working myself to death, and I was just fading. Like if I stayed there much longer, I'd stop being a person and just become another piece of furniture. I thought a wife might— He stopped, searching for the words. Might remind me how to be human again. Marion's expression softened almost imperceptibly. And has it? I don't know yet. Caleb gathered the reins again. But I'm starting to think maybe it might. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it felt different now. Less like distance and more like understanding. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay in the loft, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the wind shake the shutters. Below, he could hear Marion moving around. She was restless too. Finally, he gave up and climbed down. Marion was at the table, wrapped in a shawl, reading by lamplight. She looked up when he appeared. Can't sleep? She asked. Too much wind. He poured himself water from the pitcher. You? Old habit. I used to do my sewing at night when the house was quiet. Caleb sat across from her. The book she'd been reading was one of his, a collection of frontier poems he'd bought years ago and never finished. Any good? He asked. Some of it, she marked her place with a finger. Some of it's sentimental nonsense. That startled a laugh out of him. Tell me how you really feel. You asked, but she was almost smiling. There's one about a homesteader's wife that's particularly maudlin, all about her brave sacrifice and patient suffering. You don't think wives make sacrifices? I think everyone makes sacrifices. But the poems only seem to celebrate them when women make them quietly and men don't have to feel guilty. Caleb considered that. Fair enough. They sat there in the lamplight, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Caleb felt something like ease between them. Not comfort exactly, they weren't there yet, but the possibility of it. Can I ask you something? Marion said after a while. Sure. The initials. On the doorframe. Caleb's hand tightened around his cup. He'd forgotten about those. CR plus SW, carved into the wood the year he and Sarah were married. What about them? They're the first thing you see coming in, Marion said carefully. The last thing you see going out. Every time I walk through that door, I'm reminded that I'm not her. I could sand them off. Could you? Marion's eyes met his. Really? I don't know. The honesty felt like failure. Probably not. Then I'd rather you left them. Marion closed the book. At least that way we both know where we stand. She stood to leave, but Caleb caught her hand. Wait. She froze, looking down at where his fingers circled her wrist. He let go immediately. I'm sorry, he said. For the initials. For bringing you here without being ready. For— He gestured helplessly. All of it. You don't owe me apologies for grieving your wife. Maybe not. But I owe you better than this. Caleb stood, facing her across the small space. You came here because you had nowhere else to go. You're stuck with a man who's still half in love with a ghost. The town treats you like a curiosity at best and a joke at worst. And I've done nothing to make any of it easier. You married me, Marion said quietly. That was something. It was the bare minimum. It was more than I had before. They stood there, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her gray eyes, the fine lines around her mouth, the weariness she carried like a second skin. Tomorrow, Caleb said, I'm going to carve those initials out of the doorframe. Marion shook her head. You don't have to— Yes, I do. His voice was firm now. Not because I'm forgetting Sarah, but because you're right. Every time you walk through that door, you shouldn't have to see a reminder that you weren't the one I was expecting. This is your house too now. Should feel like it. Something shifted in Marion's expression. Surprise, maybe? Or something deeper that she quickly shuddered away. All right, she said finally. Thank you. She went to bed after that, leaving Caleb alone with the lamplight and his thoughts. He looked at the doorframe, at those carved initials he'd traced with his fingers 1,000 times. CR plus SW. Caleb and Sarah. Young and stupid and so damn sure they'd have forever. Tomorrow he'd cut them out. Tonight he'd let himself remember. The wind howled, the lamp flickered, and somewhere in the darkness, Caleb Rourke started to understand that letting go wasn't the same as forgetting, and that maybe, just maybe, there was room in his broken heart for more than grief. Morning came cold and clear. Caleb woke before dawn, like always, but this time he didn't head straight out. He climbed down from the loft and stood in front of that doorframe, running his fingers over the carved letters one last time. CR plus SW. He'd made those marks with a borrowed knife on their wedding night, Sarah laughing behind him, saying he was being foolish and romantic, and she loved him for it. The memory was so vivid it hurt. Her voice, her laugh, the way she'd wrapped her arms around his waist while he worked. He pulled out his chisel. The first cut felt like betrayal. The second felt necessary. By the 10th, his hands were steady and his mind was clear. Marian emerged from the bedroom while he was halfway through, her hair loose around her shoulders, still in her nightdress with a shawl pulled tight. She stopped when she saw what he was doing. "You meant it," she said. "I meant it." Caleb didn't stop working. Wood curled away from the blade in thin strips. "Should have done it before you got here." "Most men wouldn't have done it at all." "Most men didn't marry you." The words came out sharper than he'd intended, but Marian didn't flinch, just stood there watching him work, her expression unreadable in the gray pre-dawn light. When he finished, the doorframe was scarred but clean. The initials were gone, replaced by rough wood that would need sanding and oiling. It looked worse than before, honestly. A wound instead of a memory. But it was done. "There," Caleb said, stepping back. "Fresh start." Marian moved closer, reaching out to touch the raw wood. Her fingers traced the same path his had, feeling the absence of what had been there. "Thank you," she said quietly. They had breakfast after that, coffee and the last of yesterday's bread, and didn't talk about the doorframe again. But something had shifted. Caleb felt it in the way Marian moved through the cabin, less careful, less like a guest. She rearranged the cups above the basin without asking, put her sewing basket on the table instead of hiding it away. Small things, but they added up. By the time Caleb headed out to work, the cabin felt different, more lived in, less like a shrine. The timber crew noticed his mood. "You're chipper this morning," Tom Brennan said, hauling chain. "Wife finally warm up to you?" Caleb shot him a look. "Mind your business, Tom." "Just saying, you've been walking around like a whipped dog since she arrived. Nice to see you don't look quite so miserable." "I wasn't miserable. You were something." Tom grinned. "My Clara said that wife of yours is tough as nails. Didn't let those hens peck at her none." "Your Clara was one of the hens doing the pecking. That's how Clara shows interest. If she ignored the woman, that'd be an insult." Tom shrugged. "Anyway, word's getting around that you picked yourself a decent one. Age and all." Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he just went back to work. But the word stuck with him through the day. A decent one. Like Marian was livestock being appraised at market, like her value needed defending. He came home that evening with his temper short and his shoulders tight. Marian took one look at him and said, "Bad day? People are idiots." "Generally speaking, yes." She set a plate in front of him, venison and potatoes, cooked better than he could have managed. "What flavor of idiot are we talking about today?" Despite himself, Caleb almost smiled. "The kind that thinks they get to have opinions about my marriage." "Ah, that kind." Marian sat across from him with her own plate. "What are they saying now?" "That you're tough. That I picked a decent one." He stabbed at a potato. "Like you're a horse I bought at auction." "Better than being the wrong horse, I suppose." "It's not funny. It's a little funny." Marian's mouth quirked. "Caleb, I've been called worse things than tough. If that's what bothers them, they're going to run out of creative insults fairly quickly. It bothers me." "Why?" He looked up at her. This woman who'd been in his house less than 3 weeks and already knew how to read his moods, who didn't flinch when he was angry and didn't coddle him when he was sulking. "Because you deserve better than people measuring your worth by whether or not you're convenient for me." Marian set down her fork. "And what do you think my worth is?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "You heard me. What do you think I'm worth?" Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it. He hadn't thought about it in those terms. Hadn't really thought about Marian as separate from the arrangement, the practical marriage, the solution to his loneliness. "I think," he said slowly, "that you left everything you knew to come to a place where nobody wanted you, to marry a man who wasn't ready for you, and you've done it with more dignity than I've seen from anyone in a long time. I think that's worth something." Marian's eyes went bright for just a moment before she looked away. That's more generous than I expected. It's the truth. Truth and generosity aren't mutually exclusive. She picked up her fork again, but didn't eat. My husband used to say I was too practical to be worth loving. Said I had no softness, no give. That living with me was like living with a ledger book. Your husband sounds like he was a bastard. He was. Marion's voice was steady. But he wasn't entirely wrong. I am practical. I don't know how to be any other way anymore. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe. She took a bite, chewed, swallowed. But it doesn't make for very good company. Caleb thought about that while they finished eating. About Sarah, who'd been all softness and laughter and spontaneous joy. Who'd made him feel like the world was brighter just because she was in it. And about Marion, who was none of those things, but who made him feel steadier somehow. More anchored. Different wasn't the same as worse. He was starting to understand that. After dinner, Marion pulled out her sewing. Caleb sat by the fire with the newspaper he'd bought in town 3 days ago and still hadn't read. The words swam in front of his eyes, meaningless. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "You can ask." Marion didn't look up from her stitching. "I might not answer." "Why didn't you remarry before, after your husband died?" Her needle paused mid-stitch. "You mean, why did no one want me?" "That's not what I meant." "Yes, it was." She resumed sewing. "But it's a fair question. The truth is, some men did want me. Wanted a housekeeper they could bed without paying wages. Wanted someone to raise their children and ask no questions and expect nothing in return. You said no." "I said no." Marion tied off a thread, snipped it clean. "I'd rather be alone than be used. At least alone, I could pretend I had choices." "And this? Coming here? This was different. You were honest about what you wanted. A practical arrangement, nothing more. No promises of love, no pretending it was anything other than what it was." She looked at him then. "I could live with that. What I couldn't live with was being lied to." Caleb folded the newspaper, giving up any pretense of reading. "I've been thinking about that. About what we agreed to. Having regrets?" "No, but I'm wondering if maybe we were too rigid about it." Marion's hand stilled completely now. "Meaning? Meaning maybe we don't have to be so careful all the time. Maybe we could just..." He struggled for the words. "Be around each other, without all the rules. Rules keep things simple." "Simple isn't the same as good." They looked at each other across the cabin, the fire crackling between them. Marion's face was guarded, but there was something else there too. Something that looked almost like hope, quickly buried. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. "I don't know." Caleb stood, restless. "I just know that tiptoeing around each other isn't working. You're my wife. You live here. And I'm tired of treating you like a stranger I'm obligated to be polite to. What would you rather treat me like? Like a person I might actually want to know." The words hung in the air between them, raw and unpolished. Marion set aside her sewing, folding it with careful precision. "And if you get to know me and decide you don't like what you find? Then at least it'll be honest." "Honest?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Caleb, I'm 50 years old. I've buried a daughter and a husband. I've lived on charity and scrubbed other people's floors and worn clothes that were mended so many times the patches had patches. I'm not interesting. I'm just tired. You don't seem tired right now." "That's because I'm using anger to stay awake." "Why are you angry?" "Because..." Marion stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Because you're being kind, and I don't trust kindness. Because every time someone has been kind to me, it's come with conditions. And I'm waiting for yours." "I don't have conditions." "Everyone has conditions." "Fine." Caleb crossed his arms. "Here's mine. Stop waiting for me to turn into someone who'll hurt you. I'm not your dead husband. I'm not the man who wanted to use you. I'm just a widower who carved his first wife's initials out of the doorframe because it seemed like the right thing to do for his second wife. That's all." Marion's breath came short and sharp. "That's not all." "Then what is it?" "I don't know." The outburst seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. She pressed her hands to her face. "I don't know what this is. I don't know what you want from me. I don't know how to be a wife to someone who doesn't even know why he married me." "I told you why." "You told me you were disappearing. You told me you needed someone to remind you how to be human, but you didn't tell me what happens when you figure it out. What happens when you wake up one day and realize you don't need me anymore? The question hit him like a fist to the chest. Marion. No. She lowered her hands. Her eyes were dry but fierce. I need to know. Because I've been the temporary solution before. I've been the thing that gets discarded when something better comes along, and I won't do that again. Caleb wanted to promise her she was wrong, wanted to say he'd never do that, never leave her stranded, but he'd learned enough about Marion to know she wouldn't believe easy promises. I don't know what happens, he said instead. I don't know if this works or if we crash and burn, but I can tell you this, I'm not the kind of man who walks away from his word. I married you. That means something to me, even if we're still figuring out what exactly it means. Your word. My word. Marion studied him for a long moment. And if your word is all I ever get, if this stays practical and convenient and nothing more, then at least you'll know you had it. She let out a breath that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely. You're a strange man, Caleb Rourke. You're not the first person to say so. I'm sure I won't be the last. She picked up her sewing again, but her movements were less tense now. All right, we'll try it your way. Less rules, more honesty, but if this goes badly, it won't. You don't know that. No, Caleb admitted, but I'm willing to find out. The days started to blur together after that, but in a good way. Caleb stopped sleeping in the loft. Not because anything changed between them, they were still careful, still separate, but because the bed was bigger and his back was starting to complain about the narrow cot upstairs. Marion didn't object, just moved her things to one side and left him the other. They developed a rhythm. He'd wake first, get the fire going. She'd make coffee while he dressed. They'd eat breakfast together, actually talking instead of that painful politeness from before. He'd tell her about the timber operation, about the men on his crew, about the asshole who ran the mill in town. She'd tell him about the garden she wanted to plant come spring, about the book she'd found on his shelf that was surprisingly good despite its terrible cover. Small things, normal things, things that felt dangerously close to comfortable. One morning, about a month after Marion arrived, Caleb came downstairs to find her standing in front of the bedroom door, staring at something. What is it? He asked. She pointed. He looked and felt his stomach drop. Someone had carved fresh initials into the doorframe. Not the same place as before, but close enough to make the message clear. CR plus SW. I didn't hear anyone come in, Marion said quietly. I'm a light sleeper. I would have heard. Must have been while we were both out. Caleb's hands curled into fists. Yesterday, when we went to check the trap line. Who would do this? Caleb had a pretty good idea. Tom had mentioned that Clara was stirring up the other women in town, getting them riled about the older bride who'd taken a younger man. But carving it into his door? That was something else. I'll take care of it, he said. How? I don't know yet. He grabbed his chisel from where he'd left it by the toolbox. But first I'm getting rid of these. Marion caught his wrist. Wait. Wait for what? Don't do it angry. You'll dig too deep, ruin the wood. She was right, damn her. His hands were shaking. Let me, Marion said. You don't have to. I know. She took the chisel from him. But I want to. So he let her, stood there and watched while his wife carefully, methodically removed another woman's initials from their bedroom door. She worked in silence, her face set in concentration, and when she finished, the wood was clean again. There, she said, handing him back the chisel. Caleb looked at the raw patch where the letters had been. I'm going to find out who did this. And then what? I don't know. Break their hands, maybe. Very practical. I'm not feeling practical right now. Marion set the chisel aside and turned to face him fully. Caleb, someone wants you to know that you made a mistake, that I'm the wrong wife. Getting violent about it won't change their minds. I don't care about changing their minds. Then what do you care about? He looked at her, this woman in her mended dress with her gray-streaked hair, standing in front of their bedroom door, defending his honor, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I care about you not having to live with this, he said. Something softened in her expression. I've lived with worse. That's not the point. Then what is the point? The point is that you shouldn't have to. Caleb grabbed his coat from the peg. I'm going into town. To do what? To make it very clear that anyone who has a problem with my wife can take it up with me directly instead of sneaking around carving initials like a coward. Marion opened her mouth, probably to tell him he was being stupid, but something in his face must have convinced her that arguing was pointless. "Don't get arrested," she said instead. "I'll try my best." The ride into town took 20 minutes. Caleb spent all of them getting angrier. By the time he walked into the general store, he was ready to put his fist through a wall. Horse Miller took one look at him and held up his hands. "Whatever it is, I didn't do it. Someone carved initials into my bedroom door, Sarah's initials, while we were out of the house." Horace's expression shifted. "That's a hell of a thing. You know who might have done it?" "Caleb, half the town thinks you married wrong. Could have been anyone with an opinion and poor impulse control." "Narrow it down." Horace chewed his lip. "Billy Colfax was talking big yesterday. Said it was a shame to see Sarah's memory disrespected by you taking up with an old woman." Billy Colfax, Jimmy's older brother, 22 and stupid as a bag of rocks. "Where is he?" "Probably at the mill, but Caleb—" Horace leaned across the counter. "Kid's an idiot, but he's not worth catching an assault charge over. I'm not going to assault him." Caleb headed for the door. "I'm just going to have a conversation." The mill was loud and smelled like sawdust and sweat. Caleb found Billy loading cut timber onto a wagon, laughing about something with one of the other workers. "Billy?" Caleb called. The kid turned, saw Caleb's face, and went pale. "Mr. Rourke, I was just— You were just what? Breaking into my house and vandalizing my property?" "I didn't break in. The door was unlocked." So it was him. Rage flared hot and bright in Caleb's chest. "You had no right," he said, voice low and dangerous. "No right to touch my house, my door, my life. I was just— Sarah deserved better than to be forgotten." "Forgotten?" Caleb stepped closer. Billy backed up until he hit the wagon. "You think I've forgotten my first wife because I married another one? You think that's how it works? You carved out her initials. I carved out her initials because my current wife shouldn't have to walk past a reminder every day that she wasn't my first choice. Because I'm trying to build something new instead of living in something dead. And you—" He jabbed a finger at Billy's chest. "You don't get to have an opinion about it." "Everyone's got opinions," Billy muttered. "Then keep them to yourselves." Caleb's voice carried across the mill now. Other workers were stopping to watch. "My marriage is nobody's business but mine and Marion's. And if anyone touches my property or my wife again, we're going to have a much different kind of conversation." He left before he could do something stupid. Rode back home with his hands still shaking, but this time from the effort of holding back instead of the anger itself. Marion was waiting on the porch when he arrived. "You didn't get arrested," she observed. "Told you I'd try." "Did you find out who did it?" "Billy Colfax, Jimmy's brother. Kid's an idiot with too much Sarah worship and not enough sense." Marion nodded slowly. "What did you do to him?" "Nothing. Just told him to keep his hands off my house and his opinions to himself." "That's all?" "That's all." Caleb dismounted, tied off the horse. "Wanted to do more. Wanted to make him hurt the way I hurt when I saw those initials. But you were right. Violence won't fix this." "I didn't say that to stop you from defending us." "I know." He climbed the porch steps, stood in front of her. "But you did stop me from making it worse. So thank you." Marion looked up at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Caleb saw something unguarded in her expression. Not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of it. "You called it us," she said quietly. "What?" "You said defending us. Not defending me. Not defending your choice. Us." Caleb hadn't even realized. "I suppose I did." "That's—" She stopped, looked away. "That's more than I expected. Seems like I'm full of surprises." "Seems like you are." They went inside together. Marion made dinner while Caleb oiled the scarred doorframe, working the finish into the wood until it was smooth again. Not perfect, the marks would always show if you knew where to look, but better. That night, lying in bed with careful space between them, Caleb said, "I meant it. About us." Marion was quiet for so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, "I know you did. That's what scares me." "Why?" "Because every time I start to believe in something, it gets taken away." Caleb thought about that. About Sarah, about Elizabeth, about all the ways life taught you not to hope for too much. Maybe this time it won't, he said. Maybe. Marion's voice was soft in the darkness. Or maybe we're both fools. Probably both. She laughed, actually laughed, and the sound of it made something in Caleb's chest ease. They fell asleep like that, not touching, but closer than they'd been before. And outside, the wind howled and the snow fell, and the cabin held them both like a promise. It wasn't quite ready to keep. The weeks turned colder. Caleb brought in the last of the winter wood, stacked it high against the north wall. Marion organized the root cellar with a precision that bordered on obsessive, labeling everything, rotating stock. They worked together like a team now, anticipating each other's needs, moving around each other with practiced ease. It should have felt good. It did feel good. But Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, some reckoning they weren't ready for. He just didn't know what it was yet. The reckoning came on a Thursday in late November, dressed in an expensive coat and riding a black gelding worth more than Caleb made in 6 months. Caleb was splitting wood behind the cabin when he heard the horse. He straightened, axe still in hand, and watched the rider approach up the mountain trail. Even from a distance, everything about the man screamed money. The cut of his clothes, the way he sat his horse, the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been told no in his life. Marion came out of the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. She took one look at the approaching rider and went absolutely still. "Marion?" Caleb moved toward her. "You know him?" "Yes." Her voice was flat, dead. "That's Victor Hale." The name hit Caleb like ice water. Victor Hale. The man who'd arranged Marion's passage west. The creditor who'd owned her debts, her life, her choices. The man Marion had been running from. Hale pulled his horse to a stop at the base of the porch steps, looking down at them both with an expression that made Caleb's grip tighten on the axe handle. "Marion," Hale said, his voice smooth as oil, "you're looking well. Mountain air must agree with you." "Mr. Hale." Marion's hands were clenched in her apron. "I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly." Hale's eyes slid to Caleb, assessing and dismissing in the same glance. "You must be the husband. Caleb Rourke, isn't it?" "That's right." Caleb didn't move. "What brings you all the way up here?" "Business." Hale dismounted with the ease of someone who did everything well. "I like to check on my investments periodically. Make sure everything's proceeding as agreed." "Your investments," Caleb repeated slowly. "Did Marion not explain?" Hale smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Caleb want to put the axe through his skull. "I arranged this marriage, paid her passage, settled her debts in Philadelphia, made all the necessary introductions. Naturally, I have an interest in seeing it succeed." Marion's face had gone pale. "You said the debt was forgiven." "I said it would be forgiven upon your successful marriage and relocation. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgotten, my dear." Hale pulled a folder from his saddlebag. "I took the liberty of reviewing your late husband's accounts. Turns out he owed considerably more than either of us initially thought." "That's not possible. We went through everything. You went through what you knew about." "Benjamin had other debts, other creditors, most of whom were happy to sell me their notes for pennies on the dollar." Hale opened the folder, showing pages covered in numbers that meant nothing to Caleb, but clearly meant everything to Marion. "When you add it all up, it comes to roughly $3,000. The number landed like a boulder. "3,000, Marion whispered. There's no way. I have the documentation right here, all properly notarized and legal." Hale's smile widened. "Of course, I'm a reasonable man. I don't expect immediate payment, but I will expect regular installments. Say $50 a month?" Caleb did the math quickly. $50 a month for $3,000 would take years, 5 years at minimum, and that was assuming they could even spare $50 a month, which they couldn't. "You son of a bitch," Caleb said quietly. Hale turned that smile on him. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Caleb set the axe down carefully, not trusting himself to hold it anymore. "You wait until she's married, until she's settled, and then you show up with debts that probably don't even exist. They exist. I assure you, everything is perfectly legal." "Legal doesn't mean right." "No," Hale agreed. "But it does mean enforceable, and if Marion can't pay, well..." He shrugged. "There are other arrangements we could discuss. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Marion made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. You said I was free. You promised. I promised you'd be free of Philadelphia. And you are. I never said anything about being free of your obligations. Hale tucked the folder back into his saddlebag. Now, I'm staying at the hotel in Ridgewood for the next few days. I'll expect your first payment by Sunday, $50, cash. We don't have $50, Caleb said. Then I suggest you find it, unless you'd prefer I take alternative compensation. Hale's eyes slid to Marion again, making his meaning crystal clear. Caleb moved before he could think about it, putting himself between Hale and Marion. Get off my property. Your property. Hale laughed. Mr. Rourke, everything you see here is built on borrowed time and borrowed money. The lumber operation you work for? I own a controlling interest. The land this cabin sits on? Part of a trust I manage. Even your wife, especially your wife, exists in my debt. So when I say I want $50 by Sunday, what I'm really saying is that you'll give it to me or I'll take something worth considerably more. Try it, Caleb said, voice low and dangerous. See what happens. Caleb, Marion's hand touched his arm. Don't. Listen to your wife, Hale said. She knows how this works. She's been playing this game longer than you have. He mounted his horse with the same easy grace he'd dismounted with. Sunday, $50. Don't disappoint me. He rode off down the mountain, leaving them standing in the yard with the smell of wood smoke and coming snow, and something that felt a lot like despair. Marion was shaking. Caleb could feel it where her hand still gripped his arm. Inside, he said. She followed him into the cabin like a sleepwalker. Caleb built up the fire, poured her whiskey from the bottle he kept for emergencies, and waited while she drank it in one shaking gulp. I'm sorry, she said finally. I didn't know. I swear to you, I thought it was over. Thought I was free. I know. $3,000. She laughed, but it sounded broken. I'll never pay that off. Never. Even if we both worked every day for the rest of our lives, we'll figure it out. How? Marion looked at him with eyes that had given up hoping. You heard him. He owns everything. The lumber operation, the land, probably half the businesses in town. We can't fight him. Can't run from him. We're trapped. Caleb sat across from her, his mind racing through options and discarding them just as fast. They could refuse to pay. Hale would take Marion or the cabin or both. They could try to leave. Hale would find them. Men like that always did. They could go to the law. But Hale probably owned the law too. Tell me about him, Caleb said. Everything you know. What's there to tell? He's rich. He's powerful. He gets what he wants. There's more than that. Nobody's just powerful. There's always something underneath. Marion refilled her glass, not drinking it this time, just holding it. He inherited his father's business 20 years ago, textile mills mostly, but he expanded into lumber and mining, made a fortune during the war selling uniforms to both sides. After, he started buying up debts, said it was more reliable than manufacturing. Buying debts from who? Anyone who'd sell. Widows mostly. People who couldn't pay. He'd offer them a way out, work for him, marry someone he chose, sign over property. Always legal, always documented, always impossible to escape. How many others are there? Besides you? Marion's hand tightened around the glass. I don't know. Dozens, maybe. I met 3 other women in Philadelphia who'd made similar arrangements. One went to California. One to Montana. I don't know what happened to the third. Caleb felt something cold and hard settling in his chest. He's running a business. Trading in people. Trading in desperation. Marion finally drank the whiskey. The law doesn't care as long as the paperwork's in order, and Victor's very good with paperwork. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling, the wind picking up outside. Caleb thought about Sarah, about how she died while he was working, about how he'd spent 4 years telling himself that if he'd just been there, if he'd just come home sooner, maybe things would have been different. He wasn't going to make that mistake again, wasn't going to let someone he cared about get hurt because he was too slow or too stupid to act. We're not paying him, Caleb said. Marion looked up sharply. What? We're not paying him $50 or $3,000 or anything else, because the minute we start paying, we're admitting he owns us. And I don't care what the paperwork says. Nobody owns you. Caleb, you don't understand. I understand fine. He's a bully with legal documents and a fancy coat, but bullies can be beaten. Not this one. He's too what? Too rich? Too connected? Caleb leaned forward. Marion, men like Victor Hale only have power because people are afraid to stand up to them, because it's easier to pay than to fight. But I'm not afraid of him. You should be. Maybe. But I'm more afraid of what happens if we don't fight. He reached across the table, covered her hand with his. You came here to be free. I'm not letting him take that away. Marion stared at their joined hands like she couldn't quite believe they were real. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, but I've got until Sunday to figure it out. The next morning, Caleb rode into town, not to the general store or the mill, but to the land office. A cramped little building that smelled like old paper and desperation, run by a clerk named Henry Morrison, who'd been managing property records since before Caleb was born. Mr. Rourke, Henry said, looking up from his ledgers. Don't usually see you in here. Something wrong with your deed? Maybe. I need to know who actually owns the land my cabin's on. Henry's eyebrows rose. You do. Been in your name since you filed the claim 8 years ago. You're sure? Victor Hale said. Victor Hale says a lot of things. Henry pulled out a massive ledger, flipped through pages. Here, Caleb Rourke. 40 acres on the North Ridge, properly surveyed and recorded. No liens, no encumbrances, no claims against it except the original homestead requirements, which you satisfied years ago. Relief and anger hit Caleb in equal measure. So Hale was lying. About owning your land? Absolutely. Though I wouldn't put it past him to try to claim otherwise. Henry closed the ledger. Word of advice? Whatever business you have with Victor Hale, get everything in writing and have a lawyer look at it first. I'll keep that in mind. Next stop was the lumber office. Tom Brennan was there, going over shipping manifests. Caleb, Tom said. Thought you were working the high country today. Needed to check something. Who owns the logging operation? Tom blinked. What? The logging operation. The business. Who owns it? We do. Me and my brothers and about 15 other shareholders. Why? Victor Hale claims he owns a controlling interest. Tom's expression darkened. The hell he does. Hale tried to buy in 3 years ago, but we told him to pound sand. Man's a vulture. We wanted nothing to do with him. So that was 2 lies. Caleb's anger was building into something useful now. Thanks, Tom. Caleb, wait. What's this about? Hale's trying to collect a debt from my wife. Says he owns half the territory, and we'd better pay up or else. Tom's jaw tightened. Your wife's the woman from Philadelphia? The one he sent out here? That's her. Son of a bitch, Tom set down his manifest. My cousin had a run-in with Hale about 5 years back. Woman he was courting had debts Hale bought up. Hale tried the same thing, inflated the numbers, showed up demanding payment, threatened her when she couldn't pay. What happened? My cousin took the documents to a lawyer in Denver. Turns out half of them were forgeries. The other half were debts that had already been paid, but Hale had bought the notes anyway and was trying to collect twice. Tom grabbed his coat. Come on, we're going to see Judge Hendricks. Judge Hendricks was a lean, silver-haired man who ran his courtroom with the same precision he brought to everything else. He listened to Caleb's story without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. Victor Hale, he said when Caleb finished. I've had my eye on that man for years. Slippery as an eel and twice as hard to catch. You say he has documentation? He showed Marion some papers, claimed they were her late husband's debts. And you didn't get copies? Didn't think to ask. Hendricks drummed his fingers on his desk. That's his method. Showed just enough to scare people into paying without giving them time to verify anything. By the time they realize they've been had, he's long gone with their money. He leaned back in his chair. Here's what we're going to do. Sunday, when Hale comes for his payment, you tell him you need to review the documents with your lawyer before you agree to any payment schedule. I don't have a lawyer. You do now. I'll represent you pro bono. Hendricks smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut. I've been waiting for someone to give me cause to haul Victor Hale into my courtroom. Looks like you just did. Caleb rode back up the mountain with something that felt dangerously like hope. He found Marion in the garden plot she'd been preparing for spring, digging with a determination that looked a lot like desperation. Marion. She looked up, face flushed from exertion. Did you find something? He's lying. About the land, about the lumber operation, probably about the debts, too. Marion sat back on her heels. How do you know? Checked with the land office and Tom Brennan. Hale doesn't own any of what he claimed, and Judge Hendricks says this is his pattern. Show fake documents, collect before anyone can verify, disappear before he gets caught. But the debts, my husband's debts, might be real, might not be, but $3,000, that's not real. Hendricks says Hale inflates the numbers, adds interest that doesn't exist, doubles up on debts that were already paid. Caleb pulled her to her feet. We're going to fight this, properly, legally, and we're going to win. Marion was shaking her head. You don't know what he's capable of. Then tell me what he's done that's so terrible we should just roll over and let him win. She pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. The woman I mentioned, the third woman in Philadelphia. Her name was Anna Reeves. She had debts like mine. Hale offered her the same arrangement, marry a man out west, debts forgiven. What happened? She tried to run instead, thought she could disappear in New York, start over. Marion's voice had gone flat again. Hale found her in 3 weeks, brought her back, made an example of her. What kind of example? The legal kind. Had her arrested for fraud for breaking their contract. She spent 6 months in jail. When she got out, she was broken. Did whatever Hale told her after that. Caleb felt sick. Marion, so don't tell me we can fight him. Don't tell me the law will protect us. The law is whatever Victor Hale says it is. Not here. Caleb grabbed her shoulders, made her look at him. Not in Hendricks' courtroom. Not with half the town knowing what Hale's really doing. He can't buy everyone. He doesn't need to buy everyone. Just enough. But there was something in her eyes now that hadn't been there before. Something that might have been the faintest spark of fight. Trust me, Caleb said. Just this once. Trust that maybe I know what I'm doing. Marion let out a shaky breath. And if you're wrong, then we'll deal with it together. She studied his face for a long moment, and Caleb had the sense she was measuring him against every other man who'd ever let her down. Finally, she nodded. All right, but when this goes badly, I reserve the right to say I told you so. Fair enough. Sunday came too fast and too slow at the same time. Caleb spent Saturday preparing, reviewing everything Hendricks had told him, memorizing the script, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Marion was quiet. She cooked breakfast, cleaned the cabin, did all the normal things, but there was a tension in her movements that Caleb recognized. She was waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for Hale to win because in her experience, men like Hale always won. The knock came at noon. Caleb answered the door to find Victor Hale on his porch, dressed like he was attending a society function instead of collecting blood money from a mountain cabin. Mr. Rourke, Hale said pleasantly, I hope you have good news for me. Depends on your definition of good news. We need to review the documentation before we agree to any payment. Hale's smile didn't waver. I showed Marion the documents on Thursday. You showed her some papers. I need copies. Need to verify the amounts, the interest calculations, the validity of the debts themselves. Mr. Rourke, I don't think you understand your position here. No, I don't think you understand yours. Caleb kept his voice level. You claimed you owned my land. You don't. Claimed you owned the lumber operation. You don't. So forgive me if I'm skeptical about these mysterious debts you say my wife owes. Hale's expression went cold. Are you calling me a liar? I'm saying I need proof, real proof, the kind that'll hold up when I show it to Judge Hendricks. The name hit its mark. Hale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You involved Hendricks. I involved my lawyer, who happens to be Judge Hendricks. He's very interested in reviewing your documentation. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, casual as anything. So here's how this is going to work. You're going to provide copies of every document related to Marion's supposed debts. We're going to review them. If they're legitimate, we'll work out a payment plan. If they're not, and I'm betting they're not, you're going to walk away and never bother my wife again. Hale stood very still. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. There are consequences for breaking a contract, Mr. Rourke. Show me the contract. Show me where Marion agreed to pay $3,000 she doesn't owe for debts that probably don't exist. Show me the fine print that says you get to lie and cheat and terrorize women into compliance. Caleb straightened. Or get off my property before I throw you off. Hale's mask slipped for just a second, showing the ugly thing underneath. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A bully who's used to getting his way because nobody's ever stood up to him before. Caleb crossed his arms. Well, I'm standing up, and I'm not moving. They stared at each other for a long moment. Caleb could hear Marion breathing behind him, could feel her fear like a living thing. Very well, Hale said finally. I'll have my lawyer contact Judge Hendricks. We'll settle this properly. Looking forward to it. Hale turned to leave, then paused. Mr. Rourke? A word of advice. The people who fight me rarely come out ahead, and the ones who do usually lose something else in the process, something they value more than money. The threat was clear enough. Caleb felt his hands curl into fists. Thanks for the advice, he said. Here's some of mine. The next time you threaten my wife, make sure I'm not around to hear it. Hale rode off without another word. Caleb closed the door and turned to find Marion staring at him like he'd just grown a second head. What the hell was that? She demanded. That was me calling his bluff. That wasn't a bluff. That was a promise. He's going to come after us. After you. Let him try. Caleb moved toward her. Marion, I meant what I said. Nobody owns you. Not him, not some dead husband's debts, not anyone. And I'll be damned if I let him make you believe otherwise. You don't understand what he's capable of. I understand that he's counting on you being too scared to fight back. That he's counting on me caring more about peace than about doing what's right. Caleb took her hands. They were ice cold. But I've already buried one wife. I'm not going to stand by and watch another one get destroyed by a man who thinks money and power make him untouchable. Marion's eyes were bright with tears she refused to let fall. He'll ruin you. Maybe. But I'd rather be ruined fighting than whole and complicit. That's stupid. Probably. Caleb pulled her closer. But it's my brand of stupid, and you're stuck with it now. She made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then she was holding on to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting under her feet. I don't deserve this, she whispered against his shoulder. Don't deserve you fighting for me. That's not how this works. How what works? Marriage, partnership, whatever the hell we're calling this. Caleb rested his chin on top of her head. You don't have to earn being defended. You just have to exist. And I'll do the rest. They stood like that for a long time, while the fire burned low and the mountain wind rattled the windows, and somewhere down below, Victor Hale made plans that probably involved making Caleb regret every word he'd said. But for now, in this moment, they had each other. And sometimes that was enough. The week that followed was the longest of Caleb's life. Every morning he woke expecting some kind of retaliation from Hale, the lumber crew turning him away, the land office suddenly discovering problems with his deed, something. But nothing happened. The silence was worse than any threat. Marion moved through the cabin like a ghost waiting for the haunting to start. She cooked and cleaned with mechanical precision, but Caleb could see her flinch every time a branch snapped outside or the wind knocked something over. She was braced for impact. On Wednesday, Judge Hendricks sent word. Hale's lawyer had submitted the documentation. Caleb was to come to town Friday morning to review it. I'm coming with you, Marion said when he told her. You don't have to— Yes, I do. Her voice was firm. These are my debts, my past. I should be there when it gets picked apart. Caleb didn't argue. He understood the need to face things head-on instead of waiting for them to sneak up behind you. Friday morning dawned gray and cold. They rode into Ridgewood together, neither of them speaking much. The town was quiet, most folks still inside where it was warm. Judge Hendricks' office was above the courthouse, a small room lined with law books and smelling like pipe tobacco. Hendricks was already there, papers spread across his desk. He looked up when they entered, his expression carefully neutral. Mr. and Mrs. Rourke, please sit. They sat. Caleb could feel Marion trembling beside him, though she hid it well. Hendricks pushed a stack of documents toward them. This is what Hale's lawyer submitted. I've had 2 days to review it, and I have to say it's an impressive piece of fiction. Marion's breath hitched. Fiction? About 60% of these debts are duplicates, the same debt listed 2 or 3 times with slightly different dates or creditor names. Another 20% are debts that were already settled. I found discharge papers in the public record for most of them. Hendricks tapped one document. This one, for example, listed here as $800 owed to a mercantile company. But I found the receipt of payment dated 6 months before your husband died. Then they're not real? Marion's voice was barely above a whisper. Oh, some of them are real. Your husband did owe money, but the total legitimate debt comes to about $400, not $3,000. And most of that's old enough that it's legally unenforceable at this point. Hendricks leaned back in his chair. The question is what we do about it. We expose him, Caleb said. Take this to the territorial authorities. Get him arrested for fraud. That's one option, a difficult one. Hendricks pulled out another sheet. Hale's been very careful. All the documentation is technically legal. He did buy these debts, even the ones that were already paid. He can claim it was an honest mistake, that he didn't know some had been settled, and he has enough lawyers and enough money to drag this out for years. So he gets away with it? Marion's hands were clenched in her lap. Just like always? I didn't say that. Hendricks smiled grimly. I said taking it to the authorities would be difficult, but there's another approach. We confront him directly, in my courtroom, with you present as witnesses. Force him to either produce legitimate proof or withdraw his claim entirely. And if he doesn't withdraw? Caleb asked. Then we go to trial. And I promise you, I'll make sure every newspaper in the territory knows exactly what Victor Hale tried to do. Hendricks' eyes were hard. Men like him hate exposure more than they hate losing money. Bad publicity is bad for business. Marion was shaking her head. You don't know him. He'll find another way. He always does. Mrs. Rourke. Hendricks' voice gentled. I've been a judge for 23 years. I've seen men like Hale before. They seem invincible until someone finally stands up and calls them what they are. Then they fold like a bad hand of cards. And if you're wrong, then you're in no worse position than you are now. He claims you owe $3,000 you don't have. We're saying you owe nothing, or at most $400 on debt so old they're barely enforceable. Even in the worst case, you come out ahead. Caleb looked at Marion. Her face was pale, but there was something new in her expression. Not hope exactly, but maybe the absence of complete despair. What do you think? He asked her. I think I'm tired of running. Marion's voice was steady now. I think I've spent 7 years letting Victor Hale control my life, and I'm done with it. Then we fight, Caleb said. Then we fight, she agreed. Hendricks set the hearing for the following Tuesday. 4 days to prepare, 4 days for Caleb to work himself into knots, wondering if they were making the right choice. But Marion seemed calmer than she had since Hale arrived, like making the decision to fight had lifted some weight off her shoulders. On Monday night, she cut her hair. Caleb came in from checking the animals to find her standing in front of the small mirror, scissors in hand, gray-streaked locks falling around her feet. What are you doing? He asked. Something I should have done years ago. She made another cut, evening out the length. I've been hiding behind this hair, trying to look younger, more presentable, more like what people expect. You don't have to change for anyone. I'm not changing for anyone. I'm changing for me. She met his eyes in the mirror. Tomorrow, when I walk into that courtroom, I want Victor Hale to see exactly who he's dealing with. Not some scared widow he can push around. A woman who's done being afraid. Caleb watched her work, the scissors flashing in the lamplight. When she finished, her hair was shorter, sharper, framing her face in a way that made her look fierce instead of tired. How do I look? She asked. Dangerous. She smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her in days. Good. That night they lay awake in bed, neither of them able to sleep. The hearing was scheduled for 10 in the morning. Caleb kept running through everything Hendricks had told them, trying to prepare for every possible outcome. Caleb? Marion's voice came soft in the darkness. Yeah? Why are you doing this? What do you mean, this? All of it. She rolled to face him. Fighting Hale, risking everything. You could have just paid him. $50 a month would have been hard, but you could have managed it. Instead, you're picking a fight with one of the most powerful men in the territory. Why? Caleb thought about that. About Sarah. About the years of grief and isolation. About the moment Marion had stepped off that stagecoach and looked at him like she was daring the world to reject her again. Because you're my wife, he said finally, and because someone needed to tell Victor Hale that he can't just own people. Figured it might as well be me. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. No, it's a reason. I asked why. Caleb rolled to face her, close enough to see her eyes in the dim light. You want the truth? I'm doing this because watching you be afraid makes me angry. Because you deserve better than to spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. And because somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a practical arrangement and turned into something I actually give a damn about. Marion's breath caught. Caleb, I'm not saying I love you. Don't know if I'm capable of that anymore, but I care about you, about what happens to you, and that's enough to fight for. She was quiet for a long moment, then, that's the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me. It's all I've got. It's more than enough. She reached out, her hand finding his in the darkness. Thank you. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped between them, holding on to each other in the face of what morning would bring. The courthouse was packed when they arrived. Somehow word had gotten out about the hearing, and half of Ridgewood had shown up to watch. Caleb saw Tom Brennan and his wife Clara, saw Mrs. Yates from the boarding house, saw Billy Colfax lurking in the back row looking guilty. Victor Hale sat at the front with two lawyers, both dressed in expensive suits. He didn't even glance at Caleb and Marion when they entered, just sat there like he was waiting for a boring play to start. Judge Hendricks entered precisely at 10, his robes making him look taller, more severe. Court is in session. We're here regarding the matter of debt collection, Victor Hale versus Marion Rourke. Hale's lead lawyer stood. Your Honor, this is a simple matter of contract enforcement. Mrs. Rourke owes my client $3,000 in debts inherited from her late husband. Mr. Hale generously arranged her passage west on the understanding that, Mr. Patterson, Hendricks cut him off. I've reviewed your documentation. Before we proceed, I'd like Mrs. Rourke to examine these debts and confirm which ones she recognizes. He handed the stack of papers to Marion. Caleb watched her go through them, her face carefully blank. Finally, she looked up. I recognize maybe a third of these. The rest, these creditors, these amounts, I've never seen them before. Are you certain? Yes, Your Honor. My husband and I went through his debts together before he died. We made a list, tried to prioritize what we could pay. None of these larger amounts were on that list. Hale's lawyer smiled condescendingly. Your Honor, Mrs. Rourke may not have been aware of all her husband's financial dealings, or, Hendricks interrupted, these debts are fraudulent. Mr. Patterson, can you provide proof of origination for these debts? Original contracts, signed agreements, anything beyond these purchase receipts showing Mr. Hale bought them? Patterson shuffled through his papers. These are legitimate purchases of legitimate debts. That's not what I asked. Can you prove the debts themselves existed before Mr. Hale purchased them? The purchase documents prove that Mr. Hale paid someone for something. They don't prove what he paid for actually existed. Hendricks leaned forward. I found discharge papers for 7 of these debts, Mr. Patterson. Debts that were settled and closed before Benjamin Shaw died. Yet somehow they're appearing here as active obligations. Would you care to explain that? The courtroom went quiet. Hale's expression didn't change, but Caleb saw his jaw tighten. Patterson cleared his throat. There may have been some administrative errors. Hendricks let the words hang. Mr. Hale, please stand. Hale stood slowly, his face a mask of calm. Mr. Hale, did you knowingly include settled debts in your claim against Mrs. Rourke? Not knowingly, Your Honor. As my lawyer said, administrative errors. Did you verify the legitimacy of these debts before attempting to collect on them? I trusted the documentation provided by the previous creditors. Did you verify them? Hendricks' voice cracked like a whip. Hale's mask slipped. I purchased them in good faith. That's not an answer. Yes or no, Mr. Hale. Did you verify these debts? A long pause, then, no. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Hendricks banged his gavel. Order. Mr. Hale, you attempted to collect $3,000 from a woman who had no means to verify or contest your claims. You included debts that had already been paid. You inflated amounts and duplicated entries. And when challenged, you threatened to take alternative compensation. Hendricks' voice could have cut steel. This isn't debt collection. This is extortion. Your Honor, Patterson tried. Sit down, Mr. Patterson. I'm not finished. Hendricks turned back to Hale. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw this claim in its entirety. You're going to sign a document releasing Mrs. Rourke from any and all debts related to her late husband, and you're going to pay court costs. Hale's face went red. This is outrageous. You want outrageous? I can arrange for the territorial prosecutor to investigate fraud charges. I can make sure every newspaper from here to Philadelphia knows exactly what you tried to do. Or you can sign the release, leave these people alone, and count yourself lucky I'm not hauling you in front of a criminal court. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Finally, Hale spoke. I want a word with Mr. Rourke, privately. Hendricks looked at Caleb. You don't have to agree to that, but Caleb stood. I'll hear him out. They stepped into the hallway, Hale's lawyers trailing behind. Hale waited until they were alone before he spoke. You've made a very powerful enemy today, Mr. Rourke. Seems like I already had one. What you had was a manageable problem. A debt, a payment plan, everyone goes home satisfied. What you have now is a man who's going to remember this. Every business dealing you make, every contract you sign, every loan you need, I'll be there, making things difficult. Caleb looked at this man who'd terrorized his wife, who'd built an empire on other people's desperation, and felt nothing but contempt. You know what I think, Hale? I think you're used to people being too scared to fight back. Too poor, too tired, too broken. And when someone finally stands up to you, you fold. Because underneath all that money and those lawyers, you're just a small man who figured out how to profit off misery. Hale's eyes went cold. I could destroy you. Maybe. But you won't. Why not? Because destroying me means exposing yourself. Means admitting that a nobody lumberman and his mail-order bride beat you in court. Your reputation takes a hit every time you come after us. Caleb stepped closer. So here's my offer. You sign that release, you walk away, and we all pretend this never happened. Your reputation stays intact, my wife gets her freedom, and nobody has to know that Victor Hale got his ass handed to him by a woman he thought he owned. Hale stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're smarter than you look. I'm learning. Fine. I'll sign your release. But Mr. Rourke? Hale leaned in close. Stay out of my way. And keep that wife of yours out of my sight, because if I see either of you again, I won't be nearly so generous. Noted. They went back into the courtroom. Hale signed the release with sharp, angry strokes. Hendricks notarized it, made 3 copies, and handed one to Marion. Mrs. Rourke, as of this moment, you are free of all debts related to your late husband's estate. Mr. Hale has no claim on you, your property, or your future. Marion took the document with shaking hands. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me. Thank your husband. He's the one who had the spine to fight. Hale stood, straightened his coat, and walked out without looking at either of them. His lawyers scrambled to follow. The courtroom erupted. People crowding around, asking questions, offering congratulations. Tom Brennan clapped Caleb on the back hard enough to bruise. Even Mrs. Yates managed a grudging nod of approval. But Caleb only had eyes for Marion. She was standing there holding that paper like it might disappear if she let go, tears streaming down her face. He pushed through the crowd and pulled her into his arms. It's over, he said into her hair. You're free. I can't believe it. Her voice was muffled against his chest. I was so sure he'd find a way. He didn't. You won. We won. She pulled back to look at him. You won. I would have paid him. Would have spent the rest of my life under his thumb if you hadn't fought. Then it's a good thing you married a stubborn bastard. She laughed through her tears. The best thing. They made it back to the cabin by mid-afternoon. The ride up the mountain felt different somehow, lighter. Marion kept touching the release paper in her pocket like she needed to make sure it was still real. When they got inside, Caleb built up the fire while Marion put on coffee. They moved around each other with the ease of long practice, and Caleb realized he couldn't remember the last time the cabin had felt this peaceful. What did Hale say to you? Marion asked, settling at the table. In the hallway? Threatened to make my life difficult. Said I'd made an enemy. Are you worried? Caleb thought about it. No, he's a bully who got called out. He'll move on to easier targets. And if he doesn't, then we'll deal with it together. He sat across from her. Marion, there's something I need to tell you. Her expression went wary. What? Hale offered me a deal before all this went to court, said if I convinced you to pay quietly, he'd reduce the amount. Make it easier. You didn't tell me. No. Why not? Because it was bullshit designed to turn us against each other, and because I knew the minute I gave you that option, you'd take it. You'd sacrifice yourself to keep me safe. He reached across the table, took her hand. I wasn't going to let that happen. Marian's eyes were bright. You could have gotten rid of me, could have sent me back to Philadelphia, washed your hands of the whole mess. I could have. Didn't want to. Why not? Because somewhere in the last 2 months, you stopped being the mail-order bride I didn't ask for and started being my wife, the real kind, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let anyone take that away. She squeezed his hand hard enough to hurt. I don't know how to do this. Do what? This. Being with someone who actually wants me to stay, who fights for me instead of against me. We'll figure it out together. You keep saying that, because I keep meaning it. Caleb stood, pulled her up with him. Marian, I'm not good at pretty words. I'm not going to promise you romance or poetry or any of that nonsense. But I can promise you this. As long as you want to be here, you have a home. As long as you need someone in your corner, you have me. And anyone who tries to hurt you has to go through me first. Marian looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then she reached up, cupped his face in her work-roughened hands, and kissed him. It wasn't their first kiss. That had been at their wedding, awkward and obligatory and over in seconds. This was different. This was a choice, deliberate and real and full of everything they'd been dancing around for weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Marian said, I want to stay. Good. Because I don't want you to go. Even though I'm old and practical and not what you asked for. Especially because of that. Caleb pulled her closer. You're exactly what I needed, even if I was too stupid to know it. Caleb Rourke, are you saying you care about me? I'm saying I more than care about you. I'm saying this stopped being practical the day I carved those initials out of the door, maybe earlier. How much earlier? Oh, don't know. Maybe when you told off those women in the general store. Maybe when you sang that song thinking I couldn't hear you. Maybe the moment you stepped off that stagecoach and didn't apologize for being exactly who you are. Marian kissed him again, softer this time. I'm falling for you, you know. Wasn't planning to. Told myself I wouldn't. But I am anyway. That's all right. I'm falling for you too. They stood there in the fading afternoon light, holding each other like they'd found something neither of them had been looking for but both desperately needed. Outside, the wind picked up and snow started falling, the first real storm of the season. But inside the cabin on the ridge, Caleb and Marian Rourke had finally found their way home. The storm lasted 3 days. Snow piled up against the cabin walls, burying the porch steps, turning the world outside into nothing but white silence. Caleb and Marian were trapped inside together, and for the first time since she'd arrived, neither of them minded. They spent those days learning each other in ways they hadn't allowed themselves before. Marian told him about Elizabeth, about the red-haired daughter who'd loved collecting rocks and hated wearing shoes, about how grief had hollowed her out so completely she'd forgotten what it felt like to be whole. Caleb told her about Sarah, but differently this time, not as a saint he'd lost, but as a real person with flaws and fears, and a laugh that sometimes got on his nerves because it was too loud at the wrong moments. She would have hated you, Caleb said on the second night, watching Marian darn his socks with the same methodical precision she brought to everything. Marian looked up, eyebrows raised. Excuse me? Sarah. She would have thought you were too serious, too practical. She liked people who were spontaneous and loud and didn't think too hard about consequences. Sounds exhausting. It was. Caleb smiled at the memory. But it was also, I don't know, like living next to a bonfire, warm and bright, and you never quite knew when it might burn you. And me? Marian set down the sock. What am I like? You're like, he searched for the words, like bedrock, solid, something you can build on without worrying it'll shift under you. That's not very romantic. No, but it's real. Caleb moved to sit beside her. Romance is easy when you're young and everything's new. What we've got is harder. It's choosing each other when we both know exactly what we're getting into. Marian studied his face. And what exactly are you getting into? A woman who's stubborn as hell, who cuts her own hair when she's angry, who makes the best stew I've ever tasted, and can't sing worth a damn. I can sing. No, you really can't. He kissed her before she could argue. But I don't care. I'd rather have you tone-deaf and honest than perfect and false. She kissed him back, deeper this time, and when they finally pulled apart, she said, "You know what I'm getting into? Tell me." A man who thinks he's not good with words but says exactly the right thing when it matters. Who carves initials out of door frames and picks fights with powerful men because it's the right thing to do. Who's still in love with a dead woman but somehow has room in his heart for a living one too. I'm not still... Caleb stopped. All right, maybe I am. A little. That's all right. I'm still in love with a daughter who's been gone 8 years. Some loves don't die just because the person does. No, Caleb agreed. But maybe they can make room for new ones. Maybe they can. They made love that night for the first time, awkward and hesitant, and nothing like either of them had experienced before. It wasn't the passionate fumbling of youth or the practiced ease of long marriage. It was two damaged people trying to be gentle with each other's scars, trying to build something new from the wreckage of what they'd lost. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Marion said, "I never thought I'd have this again." Have what? This. Wanting someone. Being wanted back. I thought that part of my life was over. Caleb pulled her closer. It's not over until you decide it is. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of being alone. The storm broke on the 4th day. Caleb dug them out while Marion made breakfast, both of them moving with the comfortable rhythm they'd developed. When the path was clear, Caleb stood on the porch and looked out at the transformed landscape. Everything was buried under 2 feet of fresh powder, pristine and untouched. Beautiful, isn't it? Marion said, coming to stand beside him with 2 cups of coffee. It is. Caleb took the cup she offered. But we're going to pay for it. Roads will be impassable for days. Maybe weeks. Good. Good? Means nobody can bother us. She leaned against him. I'm not ready to share you with the world yet. They had another week before the roads cleared enough for Caleb to get back to work. A week of being snowed in together, learning each other's rhythms, figuring out how to be married for real instead of just on paper. It wasn't always smooth. Marion got irritable when she didn't have enough to do, scrubbing things that were already clean until Caleb had to physically take the brush out of her hands. Caleb got moody when he couldn't work, pacing the cabin like a caged animal until Marion threatened to lock him outside. But they learned that Marion needed purpose and Caleb needed movement, learned that they both got quiet when they were upset instead of loud, which meant paying attention to the silences. Learned that sometimes the best thing to do was give each other space, and sometimes the best thing was to refuse to let the other person retreat. When Caleb finally made it back to the lumber camp, Tom Brennan took one look at him and grinned. Well, well, look who finally decided to show up. Roads were blocked, Caleb said, dropping his gear. I'm sure they were. Tom's grin widened. How's married life treating you? None of your business. That good, huh? Tom clapped him on the shoulder. Good for you, Caleb. About time you had something worth smiling about. The work was brutal after a week off. Caleb's muscles screamed, his hands blistered, and by the end of the first day he could barely climb onto his horse. But it felt good to be doing something physical, something that didn't require thinking too hard. He came home to find Marion had been busy too. The cabin looked different, cleaner somehow, more organized. She'd rearranged the furniture, moved his mother's old trunk from the bedroom to the loft, hung new curtains she'd made from fabric he didn't even know they had. What do you think? She asked nervously. Caleb looked around. It didn't look like Sarah's cabin anymore. It didn't look like his cabin either. It looked like theirs. I think it's perfect. Marion's smile was worth every aching muscle in his body. December turned into January. The snow kept coming, burying the world under layer after layer of white. The timber operation slowed to a crawl. They could cut, but they couldn't haul until the spring thaw. Money got tight. Caleb started worrying about how they'd make it through to March. Marion noticed, of course. She always noticed. How bad is it? She asked one night, watching him go over the accounts for the 3rd time. Not terrible, just tight. If we're careful, we'll make it. Define careful. No new clothes. No extras. Beans and venison until I'm sick of looking at both. He rubbed his eyes. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you signed up for. Caleb. Marion closed the ledger he'd been studying. I grew up poor, married poor, stayed poor after my husband died. This? She gestured around the warm cabin. This is luxury. It's a cabin in the middle of nowhere with barely enough money to feed us. It's a cabin where nobody yells at me for spending too much on flour, where I don't have to count every penny 3 times before buying thread, where I can go to sleep without wondering if a creditor is going to show up in the morning. She took his hand. We'll make it. We always do. She was right, of course. They made it through January by being smart and resourceful. Marion let out Caleb's old shirts to make them last longer. She stretched meals so far that Caleb swore she was performing some kind of miracle with the stew pot. She found work mending clothes for other families in town, bringing in a few dollars here and there that made the difference between comfortable and desperate. Caleb picked up extra work wherever he could find it, helping repair the blacksmith's forge, cutting firewood for the boarding house, anything that paid. It was exhausting, but they managed. One bitter cold night in early February, Caleb came home to find Marion crying at the kitchen table. His heart stopped. What happened? Are you hurt? No, She wiped her eyes angrily. I'm being stupid. Tell me anyway. She pulled a letter from her apron pocket. It's from Anna Reeves, the woman I told you about, the one Hale made an example of. Caleb sat down. What does she say? She heard about what happened, about the trial, about us winning. Marion's voice broke. She said she didn't know it was possible to fight back, didn't know anyone ever won against him. That's good, isn't it? She's asking for help, wants to know if Judge Hendricks would take her case too, if she could get free like I did. Marion looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. But she doesn't have a husband willing to fight for her. She's alone. And I don't know how to tell her that without a Caleb Rourke in her corner, she's probably going to lose. Caleb thought about that, about how close they'd come to losing, about how much of their victory had depended on Hendricks being willing to fight and Hale being worried about his reputation. Write her back, he said finally. Tell her to come here. Tell her Hendricks will see her and will help however we can. Caleb, we don't have the money. We'll find it. We'll make it work. He covered her hand with his. You didn't get free just so you could pull the ladder up behind you. If we can help her, we help her. Marion's eyes filled again, but this time she was smiling. How did I get so lucky? Lucky? You married a broke lumberman who fights with creditors for fun. Exactly. Luckiest woman alive. Anna Reeves arrived in March, right as the snow started to melt. She was younger than Marion, maybe 40, with the same haunted look Marion had carried when she first arrived. Caleb saw his wife recognize that look, saw her straighten her shoulders like she was preparing for battle. You're safe here, Marion told Anna the first night, sitting her down at their table with hot food and coffee. Whatever Hale told you, whatever threats he made, you're safe. Anna's laugh was bitter. Nobody's safe from Victor Hale. I am, Marion said firmly, and you will be too. Judge Hendricks agreed to see Anna's case. It took 2 weeks to gather all the documentation to prove the same pattern of fraud and intimidation that Hale had used on Marion. This time, though, word had spread. Other women started coming forward. Women Hale had trapped in fake debts. Women he'd threatened and manipulated and controlled. By the time they went to court, there were 7 women ready to testify. Hale showed up with an army of lawyers and left with nothing. Hendricks didn't just rule against him, he banned him from doing business in the territory, fined him heavily, and sent the documentation to prosecutors in 3 other states. Anna cried when it was over. So did 2 of the other women. Marion just stood there looking fierce and vindicated and so damn proud that Caleb couldn't help but pull her into his arms. You did this, he said. We did this. No, you started it. I just backed you up. That night, they had all 7 women at their cabin for dinner. It was cramped and loud and chaotic, and Caleb had never seen Marion happier. She laughed, actually laughed, at something Anna said, and the sound of it made his chest tight with something he was finally ready to name. After everyone left, Caleb found Marion on the porch, looking out at the mountains. You all right? He asked. Better than all right. She leaned back against him. I was just thinking about the woman I was when I stepped off that stagecoach. How scared I was. How certain I was that I'd just traded one kind of prison for another. And now?
Now I'm free. Really free. Not because some man decided to let me go, but because I decided to fight back because you decided to fight with me. She turned to face him. Do you know what that means to me? Having someone who doesn't just tolerate me, but actually wants me to take up space? I more than want it. I need it. Caleb cupped her face in his hands. You make me better. Make me braver. Make me want to be the kind of man who deserves you. You already are that man. I'm trying to be. That's all anyone can do, try. Fail sometimes, try again. She kissed him. I love you, Caleb Rourke. Probably loved you since you carved those initials out of the door. Maybe earlier. I love you too. The words came easier than he'd expected. Not the same way I loved Sarah. Different, but just as real. Good. Because I don't want to be Sarah. I just want to be me. You are. And you're enough. More than enough. Spring came in hard and fast that year. The snow melted, the creeks flooded, and the mountains turned green so quickly it seemed like magic. Marion planted her garden, spending hours in the dirt with a contentment Caleb had never seen in her before. She grew vegetables they actually needed, potatoes, carrots, beans, but also flowers. Wildflowers that served no purpose except to be beautiful. Waste of space, Caleb teased, watching her water a patch of purple blooms. Beauty is never a waste. Marion stood, brushing dirt from her knees. Besides, they make me happy. Isn't that purpose enough? He couldn't argue with that. The town's attitude toward them shifted too. It started small. Clara Brennan actually smiling when they came into the general store, Mrs. Yates inviting Marion to a quilting circle, people nodding respectfully instead of whispering. Slowly, Ridgewood stopped seeing Marion as the wrong bride and started seeing her as Caleb's wife, as someone who belonged. In May, Caleb came home to find Marion in the yard with a hammer and nails, building something. What are you doing? He asked. Making a sign. She held up a piece of wood she'd sanded smooth. For the cabin. Thought we should put our name on it. Our name? The Rourke place. So people know who lives here. She'd already carved the letters, deep and clean. Unless you think it's foolish. It's not foolish. Caleb took the sign, ran his fingers over the carved wood. It's perfect. They hung it together that evening, right by the front door where the old initials used to be, the Rourke place. Simple, true, theirs. That night, lying in bed with Marion's head on his chest, Caleb said, You know what I realized today? What? I'm happy. Actually happy. Haven't felt that in years. Me either. Marion's hand found his in the darkness. Funny how that works. You stop looking for happiness, and it just shows up anyway. We earned it, I think. Maybe. Or maybe we just stopped being afraid of it. Summer was good to them. The timber operation picked up, money came in, and for the first time in years, Caleb didn't spend every waking moment worried about making it through to the next season. Marion's garden flourished. She started selling vegetables in town, making enough to buy fabric for new dresses, to replace the dishes that were chipped and worn. But more than that, she started making friends. Real friends. Women who valued her for her sharp mind and sharper tongue, who asked her advice on everything from cooking to handling difficult husbands. Marion bloomed under the attention, becoming more confident, more herself. One afternoon, Caleb came home to find her teaching 3 younger women how to can vegetables. The cabin was full of steam and laughter and the sharp smell of vinegar. Sorry, Marion said, looking slightly guilty. Didn't expect you back so early. Don't apologize, this is your house too. He grabbed a cup of water, nodded to the women. Ladies. They giggled and whispered after he left, and Caleb heard Marion shushing them. Later, she told him what they'd been saying. They think you're wonderful. A man who treats his wife like an equal instead of property. That's not wonderful, that's basic. Not around here it isn't. Marion's smile was sad. Most of their husbands treat them like children or servants. You treat me like a partner. They think that's extraordinary. Their husbands are idiots. I've been saying that for years. August brought news that Victor Hale had been arrested in Denver on fraud charges. The prosecutor had used the documentation from Marion's case and the others to build a case that finally stuck. He was looking at 5 years in prison, maybe more. When Marion heard, she didn't celebrate, just sat very still for a long time, processing.
How do you feel? Caleb asked.
I don't know. Relieved, I think, and sad. Sad? That it took this long, that he hurt so many people before someone finally stopped him. She looked up at Caleb, but also grateful that I got out when I did, that I had you to fight with me. We fought together. We did. She stood, wrapped her arms around him. Thank you for everything, for defending me when I couldn't defend myself, for believing I was worth fighting for. You were always worth fighting for. I just needed you to believe it too. That fall, Anna Reeves married Tom Brennan's cousin, the one who'd fought Hale years before. They had the wedding in Ridgewood, and half the town showed up. At the reception, Anna pulled Marion aside. I wanted to thank you, Anna said, for writing back to me, for helping me get free, for showing me it was possible. You did the hard part. You decided to fight. Only because you showed me how. Anna squeezed her hand. You saved my life, Marion. I mean that literally. I was ready to give up before your letter came. After Anna left, Caleb found Marion crying again. Happy tears or sad tears, he asked. Both. Happy that she's free and loved and safe. Sad thinking about who I was a year ago, how close I came to giving up too. But you didn't. No. I got on that stagecoach and came here and married you. Best decision I ever made. Even though I wasn't what you expected? Especially because you weren't what I expected. I expected to be tolerated, to be useful but not wanted. Instead I got, she gestured helplessly. This, you, us, a life I didn't know I was allowed to want. Caleb pulled her close. You're allowed to want everything, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you get it. Winter came around again, and this time Caleb didn't dread it. The cabin was stocked, they had money saved, and more importantly, he had Marion. They spent the long, dark evenings reading aloud to each other, playing cards, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they'd lie in bed and just listen to the wind, content in the silence. On Christmas Eve, Caleb gave Marion a gift he'd been working on for months, a carved wooden box lined with fabric, with her initials on the lid. It's beautiful, she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. What's it for? Whatever you want. Letters, mementos, secrets. He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. I just wanted you to have something that was completely yours. She opened it to find he'd already put something inside, the release document from the trial, carefully folded. So you never forget you're free, he said. Marion's gift to him was simpler but no less meaningful. She'd embroidered new curtains for the cabin, and in the corner of each one she'd stitched their initials. Not CR plus SW this time. CR plus MR. So you never forget you're not alone, she said. They hung the curtains together, and Caleb realized that somewhere along the way, this cabin had stopped being a shrine to Sarah and started being a home for him and Marion. The photographs were still there. He hadn't erased Sarah, just made room for someone new. And that felt right. Felt honest. That night, watching Marion sleep beside him, Caleb thought about the journey that had brought them here. About grief and loneliness and taking a chance on a mail-order bride he hadn't wanted. About Marion's courage in coming west, in fighting back, in choosing to stay even when leaving would have been easier. They'd both been so broken when they met. Both convinced they'd used up their allotment of happiness. Both just trying to survive. But survival had turned into something more. Into partnership. Into love. Into a life neither of them had planned, but both had chosen. The next spring, Marion planted roses by the front door. They were wild things, hardy enough to survive the mountain winters, and they bloomed fierce and bright every summer after that. People started calling their place the cabin with the roses. And Marion would smile every time she heard it. Years passed. Not smoothly. Life was never smooth. But steadily. There were hard winters and failed crops and times when money was tight. There were arguments and misunderstandings and days when they got on each other's nerves. But through it all, they held on to what they'd built. The partnership, the trust, the bone-deep knowledge that they'd chosen each other and would keep choosing each other. Caleb never stopped missing Sarah, and Marion never stopped missing Elizabeth. But they learned to carry those losses alongside their love for each other. Proof that the human heart was bigger than anyone gave it credit for.
On their 10th anniversary, Marion was 59 and Caleb was 42. They celebrated by staying home, just the two of them, eating a dinner she'd made and drinking wine they couldn't quite afford. "Do you ever regret it?" Marion asked. "Marrying an old woman when you could have had someone younger?" "Every day," Caleb said, deadpan. She threw a bread roll at him. "Seriously, though." He caught her hand. "I regret that I wasted time being an idiot about it. Wasted weeks trying to keep you at arm's length when I should have just admitted I was falling for you from the start. You were grieving. I was scared. Scared of loving someone again. Scared of losing someone again. Scared that letting you in meant betraying Sarah." He kissed her knuckles. "Took me too long to realize that love isn't a limited resource, that I could love Sarah's memory and still love you completely. And now? Now I know that marrying you was the smartest thing I ever did. That you're the strongest, bravest, most stubborn woman I've ever met. That I'd rather have one day with you than a lifetime with anyone else." Marion's eyes were bright. "You're getting sentimental in your old age? I'm 42. And I'm 59, which makes us old." She leaned across the table to kiss him. "But I'll take old and loved over young and alone any day." "Me too." They grew old together on that mountain ridge. The mail-order bride nobody expected and the widower who'd learned to love again. They became fixtures in Ridgewood, the couple people pointed to when they wanted proof that second chances existed, that love could find you when you'd stopped looking for it, that sometimes the wrong choice turned out to be exactly right. Marion became known as the strongest woman on the ridge, the one who'd stood up to Victor Hale and won, the one who helped other women find their courage. She outlived all the people who'd whispered about her age, outlived their doubts and their pity and their certainty that Caleb had made a mistake. And Caleb learned that strength came in many forms, that defending someone you loved was worth more than any amount of peace. That marriage wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone worth fighting for, and then fighting like hell to keep them. Their story spread beyond Ridgewood, became the kind of tale people told when they needed hope. About the woman who'd been sold like property and the man who'd refused to let anyone own her. About two broken people who'd built something whole from their shattered pieces. About love that wasn't pretty or perfect or easy, but was real in a way that mattered more than any of those things. Sometimes, late at night, people on the mountain would see the lights in the Rourke cabin and think about the couple inside, about how far they'd come, about how they'd turned a practical arrangement into something powerful enough to change lives. And if you listened carefully, you might hear Marion singing, still off-key, still terrible, while Caleb told her she sounded like a dying cat, and she told him to shut up and pass the coffee, because that was love too. Not the poetry and roses kind. The real kind. The kind that lasted. The kind that mattered.